So it would appear that in 2022, the key to success with electronic music and getting playlisted on huge Spotify playlists is to start pretty much every song you release with a atmospheric vocal sound, or better yet, a reversed atmosphere sound.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
Right, so jokes aside, this is a huge trend right now in so many different genres of electronic music. So I thought I'd make a video showing you guys some tips and tricks, some techniques that I've picked up over the years for making these types of sounds, and hopefully you'll see some things in this video that you haven't either done before or thought of doing before. So let's just dive right into it. There are two main types of atmospheric sounds that you'll hear in a lot of different genres of electronic music. The first type is one that we just heard. It's the reversed vocal atmosphere or atmosphere. You don't have to do this with a vocal sound. You can do it with any type of sound. But basically, you can use this as a transitional tool. You can use this to start your track, go from 0 to 100 real fast, or you can use it to transition from like a verse, build, or breakdown, or wherever you need to go in your track. Now, the second type we're going to look at in this video is the supportive atmosphere. Now, this is, again, hugely popular right now, and you can tuck this into a wide range of genres. It's basically just a single note of some type of atmospheric sound. It could be a pad, a string, a processed vocal sound, whatever it might be, playing a single note, kind of just running across the entire section of a track, maybe a verse, a build, or a breakdown. Now, we're going to look at how we can create that type of sound. We're going to look at 3 different processes to do that. So let's open up a DAW and get going. All right, the first technique we're going to look at is called blurring the sound. Now, this will be pretty common or familiar probably to an FL Studio user, but if you use a real DAW like Ableton or Logic, you've probably never heard of this. So there's this plugin in FL Studio, this weird plugin called Edison. I don't know why it's called Edison. It's like a sampler, but it sounds a lot like the power company down here in Southern California, but I digress. You can drag a sample into this, and then there's a little teardrop icon up at the top right. This is the blur function. Basically, this pulls up kind of like a unique impulse response that blurs the sound, and it's a really effective way to create atmospheric sounds like you hear here. So this isn't a real-time effect. It is just kind of you have to commit to what you process it as. But essentially, it is something that you can recreate in a convolution or impulse response reverb plugin. All right, so we're gonna be checking this process out in Logic. Again, you could do this with any DAW, any impulse response or convolution-based reverb plugin. If you want to download the FL Studio Blur impulse response, the link is down below in the description. I pulled up a vocal chop from our pack, EVOXA for Serum. It's more of a lead sound. It sounds like this. Now, I'm gonna just sample in a note into this track. I already know what key I'm in, but here's the track. All right, so you get the idea. So we're gonna basically just resample this vocal chop from EVOXA for Serum. All right, and here is Space Designer. So we're gonna go through a couple presets just so you can hear, what this is gonna sound like. All right, sounds like reverb. I'm gonna pull in the FL Studio Blur impulse response that I recreated. And again, you guys can download that. Link will be in the description. All right, so let's take a listen to this. Whew. Just right away, it's a great sounding atmosphere. So what is going on? What's so special about this blurred impulse response from FL Studio? Well, it's not an impulse response that you would typically find in a reverb plugin or convolution reverb impulse response. It's basically just a stereo white noise file where the start and the ends have been faded out, and that's what gives it that kind of reverse sound. So let's bounce this in place real quick, and we will kind of further push it along this whole reversed vocal sound idea. So if we take a listen to it now, here's the bounced one right here. So that's a nice volume change. I'm going to cut it. We're going to fade this in a little bit there, and we'll drag this back. All right, so let's actually pitch this down an octave so it doesn't start as high here. All right, we're off and running. So let's go back into Space Designer. So this is what's so cool about this whole blur idea. So this one kind of sounded reverse right away, right? I'm going to drag in just a straight up stereo white noise file without any fades at the beginning and end of the file. And we're going to use that so we can pair the reversed vocal atmosphere with more of a sustained one. Check it out. So really similar white noise file. Again, just there's no fade. So this is what it sounds like on our vocal chop sound. So it's just going to sustain for a really long time, just like so. So now I'm going to pitch this down an octave, just like I did with our reverse one. We drag this back so there's some overlap, and we'll just fade this in. So there's kind of a fade out and fade in with these two sounds. So you might be thinking, why don't you just add reverb, like a reverb throw to the end of that reverse sound? Sometimes it sounds better to have it dry because it's easier to sit in the mix because reverb always sucks back into the mix. So sometimes this just works nicely. All right, the second technique we're going to look at basically relies on this concept of freezing a reverb tail, delay tails, or sometimes even coarse if the plugin allows you to do it. So freezing is this feature that a lot of reverb plugins have. Less delay and coarse plugins have them, but they are out there. All right, so we're inside of Ableton now, and we are going to create an atmosphere out of this kind of ugly vocal right here, this vocal chop, using a freeze function inside of Reverb plugin. So here's what it sounds like in context. It's pretty bad. All right, so let's load up a Reverb plugin with a freeze feature. So what we need to do is we need to automate the freeze on as we get partway through the sound. And now that's just going to go on forever. All right, so I just resampled that into another track with the freeze on, and this is what we have right now. All right, so now we can tuck that in with the other instruments in the mix. And we essentially have our atmospheric sound. So we can take things a step further with this. The freeze function just gives you a kind of a good starting point, right? Like it's not usually your end point unless you want a really kind of simplistic sounding atmosphere. So if you want to do like a kind of like a Flume or a Son Holo style, what you could do is you could chop the audio like halfway through, and then you're going to stretch it. So we have our warp on in Ableton. You can do this in pretty much every DAW. I'm going to hold down Option, Command and Shift rather, and then I'm just going to stretch this out really far. We want artifacts, so we want it to sound kind of weird. So let's try that. Right, so with that massive stretch, it's starting to sound something like Flume would use. I'm going to put on a couple effects. All right, then to spice that up, last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in an atmospheric patch from EVOXA for Serum, because I think it's going to tuck nicely with that sound. So let's solo both of those tracks, and let's take a listen to this. I can even mess around going an octave higher. So let's record that in real quick. And finally, the third technique we're going to look at makes use of granular synthesis and granular effect. All right, so I'm just going to bounce that in place and see what we get. All right, so it's kind of cool. So then the process is basically granular effect or buffer effect into some type of reverb, and then do it again or do it over. All right, so after repeating that process about 4 or 5 more times, here is the final result. right, so that's going to sum up this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, you can post those below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you guys aren't subscribed to our channel, you know the drill. Hit that subscribe button. The support really does mean a lot to us. And if you guys haven't ever checked out our website, echosoundworks.com, definitely head on over there. There's a ton of free content, samples, loops, and presets. And of course, there's some premium sound sets and sample packs as well. And lastly, if you guys use Instagram, consider giving us a follow. We run a lot of contests, giveaways, and promotions on that platform. And I think you guys will like what we're doing over there. All right, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.